and they go off and they're largely engaging in economic activity, production. The unstable one is where one side becomes sufficiently strong or weak, and the system is upset and conflict breaks out. He allows for more complex results and talks of it, since his model is very general, could apply even to wild animals and species and such. So he allows in his model for more complex developments, such as other kinds of institutional arrangements that human beings might develop. So I threw in a third one here, which is in agreement with the kind of thing he does, where maybe we do get a third-party enforcer, a world federation or something. I'm going to argue that the first two are possible, and the third one is very unlikely. And economics, I think, tells us that. I'll say why. So let's look at what I think the first equilibrium means and why there might be an argument for that emerging from why economics might support that. So everyone, I think, knows what mutual assured destruction means. I just thought it was clever to say mad becomes mad. I'm too fond of my own cleverness, but mutual assured destruction is, of course, the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. Neither one could dare attack the other because they knew if they did, they would be destroyed. Mutual assured destruction, and it got us through the Cold War without too much violence. But maybe that kind of model with space development would be replaced by something like mutual assured development. And here's the thinking behind that. Space is, the enormity of space means that Lebensraum, you know what Lebensraum is. The enormity of space, you know what Lebensraum is. Adolf Hitler invaded the Soviet Union trying to get Lebensraum, living space in Germany. And the enormity of space means that it's not really an issue. There's plenty of room out there for everybody. We're no longer in competition for space. That is for area. Resources, energy and minerals are almost seemingly unlimited. Solar power is effectively free once we break away from Earth. Minerals, water, if they're there, they're probably readily available. And so there's not too much to be gained from fighting over them. If somebody's got that asteroid, move to the other one. There's so many things like this. You can move to different places. So there's no conflict. It's a frontier. Mutual assistance or mutual neglect will yield greater results for everyone than fighting well. And that's actually kind of provided for by the Outer Space Treaty. So that's my happy scenario. That's the stable scenario. I guess depends on what makes you happy. But, scenario number two would be breakdown and dominance. And I just divided it into two, just assuming it was just the United States and China. But one player dominates. For some reason, the system becomes unstable, they compete, they fight, or not necessarily war, but one side ends up dominating. And we know from resource economics that what something like this could lead to would be racing and overcapitalization. Racing to get resources, investing in more capital than is necessary to get them just to beat your opponent. And maybe people would begin doing things like staking out claims all over the moon, with L5 points, or anything that's central in space. And especially military domination of space around Earth. That could lead to this kind of a breakdown. And if something like that were to happen, and we didn't end up destroying ourselves in the process, I think that the winner's system would dominate. And so what do I mean? I've got two different kind of the American system and the Chinese system. I don't think these are great names for these, but I had to call them something quickly. The American system is the notion of private property via staking claims, by a homestead. The idea of Lockean property rights, if you're familiar with John Locke, common law. And the notion here would be something like we have in the Space Act of 2015. If you find it, you claim it. It's yours. Okay? And the government will recognize that. So these are rights that are individual rights that are superior to the claim of anyone else, including the government. The Chinese system, or we could call it the Russian system, but I think it fits well with China, These are private property rights as well. They have private property rights in China, but it's a little bit different in that these are rights that exist with the permission of the state. And so I think of when Deng Xiaoping started the transition, China's transition from a centrally planned economy to a market economy, one of the first steps, the first step really was developing what was called the household responsibility system. And this was a method of putting what were effectively private property rights in the hands of farmers, taking the collective farms, turning them into private property, but effectively, but not exactly. And I think that that's kind of describes what the Chinese system is. You have private property, but it's at the service of and with permission of the state. Here's the difference. It's possible for me to imagine the Supreme Court of the United States hearing a case and ruling in favor of a private property owner and throwing out the charge of the case from the federal government or from the Congress and saying the law is unconstitutional or something. That's very unlikely to happen in the Russian or the Chinese case. So a different kind of private property, one which is at the mercy of the state and one which is much less so. Okay. That's my second scenario. So let's look at the third possible scenario, and that I can visualize. Maybe there are others. But that's the World Federation or World Civilization. That's in the United Nations building in New York. And there's an Italian economist who's done a great deal of work in space economics. I think he's actually quite good. But this is what he predicts will happen. And if you think of Star Trek, in Star Trek, it's the Federation of Planets. Well, this would be the Federation of Nations or the United Nations or something like this. You've got a common framework. Everybody's together in it, and nation states lose much of their sovereignty, or they reduce much of their sovereignty. And this national or this supranational government tends to reign. I think that economics rules that out, and here's why. Actually, does anyone want? This would be a good quick time to just ask. Does anyone have any thoughts? Why would this? I'm just curious. This is my thinking. I just looked at this and I said, no, after what I said, it won't follow. Is it clear? Everybody's already jumped to my conclusion. Nobody has any idea what I can say besides me. I think economics rules this out for a couple of reasons, benefit-cost reasons. First of all, the value of national sovereignty increases with space development. Being a sovereign country in charge of your space development, the spacefaring countries are not going to relinquish that kind of control to an international body. They're going to be stronger to keep it, fight more strongly to keep it. Plus, the international body has no enforcer. They would have to come up with a way of developing an enforcement mechanism to get anyone to do this. The United States, China, and Russia already have military space assets. So I'm not sure how anyone else is going to push them around, except that a day or two ago, France announced that it is contemplating developing a space force. And there are some other countries that may be contemplating this as well. But to me, it sounds as if space development will breathe the new life into the nation state. And we'll see more kind of maybe something like Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations, only going on in space, something along those lines. Okay, great. Well, that raises one more, a final point, and that's what I go on a little bit about. But, what about the role of government? Why is government involved in this anyway, and will it be? Should point out, I have not been saying what should happen. I'm trying to predict what I think will happen. So will there be a role for government? I've already emphasized that space necessarily has a private role, necessarily in the private development of space. What about government? Well, Andrea Somariva, the Italian economist I mentioned, predicts that there will be a big public-private partnership. Government is going to play a major role, and I agree. I think that's just about inevitable for 4 reasons. And the first one is the scale of the investment that is needed to get the basic infrastructure in space, getting up there. Government has an advantage in this. Government can tax, and government can borrow, and print money in ways that most any other entity cannot. The initial infrastructure is going to require enormous investment and government power over budgets. They don't have to persuade people voluntarily the way private firms do. It is going to make them a big player here. The second reason is that they've got tremendous potential wealth that could be obtained. Governments are not going to sit around ignoring a potential $1 trillion economy. If it gets bigger than that, they're going to pay attention to it. They're going to be involved in it. The third is the incentives that are faced by the private firms that will be involved in this, and private entrepreneurs will lobby governments to be involved. They're going to ask for subsidies, they're going to ask for risk sharing, they're going to ask for protection of their property rights, certainly on Earth, or maybe in space with space forces. And so for those of us who would like to see this be a 100% free market, free enterprise kind of an account, it's not going to happen. We're out of luck. It's going to be a combination of these. That's what my prediction is. And then finally, military hybrid. Space is the military hybrid. If a country dominates space and low Earth orbit, and no other and crowds out the other countries in that, that country will dominate the world. And I think it will do so politically and culturally. And governments are going to participate in this activity, whether they want to or not. Now, potentially that could be an anarchic, stable equilibrium. And so it doesn't mean that somebody's going to dominate, but it means that governments will be involved in this. You can't really, are you able to see the picture back behind you? It's a picture of some guys operating a satellite dish kind of thing. What's of the branches of the U.S. military? Who's our most space assets? Which branch? I was shocked by this. The U.S. Army apparently has the biggest, in terms of the satellite constellations. The U.S. Army is entirely dependent upon satellites for navigation, for targeting, for communications, for spying, or reconnaissance, or whatever we call it. So this is a massive area for activity. So, great. Well, that is, I guess, brings me to my conclusion. And what have we just done? Well, first, I think, that I have found a kind of middle ground between forecasting and science fiction. And I think hope it made some sense. I've used economic theory to try to identify some probable future outcomes. I've emphasized the importance of entrepreneurship, competitive markets, private property rights. We've used looked at some of the relevant institutional constraints, the incentives of the players, and public choice. I think that's what we are going to see with space economics. And I think that's all I've got to say other than thanks.
We have some time for questions, so if you have any questions, please direct them to Dr. Steele.
I was going to say all is clear, but Ross has a question.
To what degree do you see a human presence in space being necessitated by the growing space economy? To what degree is colonization going to fit into this?
In what sense? Colonization is a very long-run thing?
Or as a necessary part of exploitation of resources? That sort of thing.
It's an engineering question to me. Like for mining asteroids, all of the pictures that I have people mining asteroids. It's very cool. But I don't know if that would be the best way to do it. You might send robots or artificial intelligence and work with that. I think that's an engineering question, and I think probably it's the kind of thing that's why you have entrepreneurship. People are going to try different ways of doing this to see what's cost effective. There's another sense in which human beings have to go to space, and that's more of an it's more of a spiritual, emotional intellectual kind of drive that humans have. I mean, I'm very excited about this kind of thing, just thinking about it. And I'd join the Space Force if I could, but that's but I'm unlikely to go to space. But just thinking about this, I think stirs something in many of us. And humans will go into space. I think also the Chinese probably are pretty serious about putting a moon base up that has people on it, in my reading of what they're doing. Jessica?
A lot of what you've described about entrepreneurship in space sounds kind of like the westward expansion in America, and that also tended to be a little anarchic and to have a lot of victory to the stronger. Do you think that that's also going to be a component in human expansion into space?
You say victory to the stronger?
Yeah, like claim jumpers and similar things.
Maybe. Here, so the people that write on this do compare this to the development of the American West. What's interesting to me when I think about the development of the American West is the development of the Canadian West. It was done differently. In the United States, private citizens went west, claimed lands, proved it, settled and things, and eventually government and the state and things followed. That's not the way it was done in Canada. In Canada, the Mounties went out, tamed an area, and then the people moved in. So those are two different kinds of approaches, and maybe this is, maybe one of those. I'm just making this up right now. Maybe one of those would be one country's approach. We'll send the state out, it develops, and then we can after we've claimed it, we can send private firms out. And then you've got Wild West entrepreneur types from the United States probably who would have a different approach. Yes?
Do you think that innovations in different types of transportation, like space transportation, do you think innovation in that area is going to cause more of a demand for space-related services?
Yes. You're simply asking if, I think what you're asking is just if we have more cheaper, better transportation, will we have more services being purchased? I think that's, yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I was reading that China plans on having atomic-powered spaceships operational by, I believe it's 2035. Professor Dolch, are you familiar with that?
I'm not. I hope that's not right.
Well, I read it, but it must be true. I mean, it wasn't even on the internet. So I think the answer is yes. Yeah, I think it's a great deal more expansion. Some people talk about space tourism. To me, that sounds fun. It doesn't sound like, I don't think that will be a big sector, not for a very, very long time, if ever. Well, eventually maybe, but I think you have to see people, colonization or something like that. Space tourism would be for the very wealthy only. Yes, Joe?
So Charles, when you think about colonization, are you thinking related to asteroids or what?
What I think?
Yeah, what
Well,
do you
no.
think? I mean, we're all trying to think about these things.
So, I don't have any particular expertise in recommending one kind of colony over another, but I think moon bases, also the idea of space station kinds of things, man-made structures in space. I don't know that there's anyone thinking of moving to asteroids in the near future. There have been, of course, discussions of setting up something on going to Mars. And who was it that was proposing proposing a project to go to Mars and asked for volunteers? It would be a one-way trip. They have an endless number of people willing to go. If you know Mike Sweeney, Professor Sweeney, the accounting professor, one of his relatives, has already volunteered for it. These are people with PhDs who are looking at this. This is the chance of a lifetime. I don't get to come back, but I'll go there and live the rest of my life out on Mars and be among the first humans to establish this stuff. These things, right now, they're still kind of science fiction, I think, living in space, but they will come.
We have time for one more question.
I have time for endless
It
questions.
is time for endless questions. We have time for two more
The first two
questions.
raised their hand first. No, go ahead, I'll get all three. Go ahead, yes.
Are you aware of any progress that the private sector has made in satellite cleanup in low Earth orbit? Because as far as, with all the little exposure I've had to this, that seems to be a problem, that old satellites and like space junk could pose a threat to.
That's a huge issue. So satellite debris, and space junk, and if it gets bad enough, that closes off space to us. And I know that there are projects and ideas to cleaning this up, but I haven't studied it. Yvonne?
I didn't understand the second scenario of the unstable equilibrium.
Mhm.
So you talked about the American model versus the Chinese
Sure.
model. How's that an unstable equilibrium? I didn't
Oh,
quite get that.
here's what I'm getting at here. One or the other dominates is the idea. So that if in the previous, in this one, everybody's in space, and the Chinese do their thing, we do our thing, and et cetera. Great, everybody's got there's space for everybody, and we're pretty cooperative, things work out pretty well. But if one country dominates and effectively drives the other out of space, then its set of property, its set of property rights will be the one that dominates. But I also think that it becomes a world civilization if that happens. If it's the Chinese, start learning Mandarin. If it's us, you mostly speak English. I'm trying to learn it here at Hillsdale. It's the idea is that's what a future world civilization
Do you have any ideas which one, if you had that kind of a scenario, which way would it go? Is there a particular
You mean,
model, that's a system that's more likely to prevail?
in this,
Yeah.
if it breaks down? No, I think that has to do more with a whole bunch of factors that aren't in Hirschleifer's model and that I didn't model either.
I have two smaller questions that are related to each other. The first one is that you mentioned how you foresee government having a necessary role in space development because of the incredible amount of capital.
Right. Actually, just to correct you, I didn't say necessary. I said inevitable. Inevitable as much as anything is inevitable. I just think it will happen. It's not necessary.
Right.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yes, there is a huge amount of capital that is required for, in this case, it's required for space development. Could you elaborate on what specifically type of infrastructure is needed? So like what, for the countries or the companies that want to develop space further, what types of projects are they likely to be working on in the near future?
Sure.
And does that capital-intensive nature of space development, do you think that'll put smaller countries that can't raise that capital at a big disadvantage?
Well, a couple things. First, I thought about doing a section on some of the problems about space access. Right now, the thing that is the greatest obstacle is simply getting away from Earth. It's extremely expensive to fire rockets to get away from Earth's gravity. If you can establish infrastructure in space so that you don't have to run back and forth between Earth and space, everything becomes a lot cheaper if you can live up there. So if either we can build orbiting space habitats or bases on the moon, something like this, then it's much cheaper. Then it becomes cost effective to have a space economy. So there's a couple of options already right there. Now there's other ideas like a space elevator. The space elevator idea is something I'm not going to talk about other than to say that the proposals for a space elevator apparently would work and would be a relatively inexpensive way to get out of Earth's out of the gravity. So a variety of things that might be done, but none of them are cheap. And the initial expenditure of capital on infrastructure, that gets you to kind of a critical mass, I think, where then you get a lot of space development that follows.
All right, well, if if you have a few more questions, please feel free to come up, and I'm sure Dr. Steele will be happy to answer. Be sure to sign that sheet with your name and email so we can give you more emails about tax events. The other officers, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand, we'll hang out a few minutes after. If you just want to talk to us in the